Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're broadcasting from the Thomas K. McKeon Center for Creativity, and I'm your host, Corey D. Taylor. My guest today was incarcerated for 31 years, but now he's here today to share his story. He's none other than Michael Nolte. If you want to know what it's like to survive and change your life, you've come to the right place, so stay tuned because this is Up Close with Corey Taylor. Hello and welcome back. We are here with the man that has an amazing story. He is none other than Michael Nolte, and we're getting ready to talk to him about this story. Michael, how you doing?
Pretty good. How are you, Corey?
Good. Hey, I know when I just did my intro, it seems a little doom and gloom, but that's just a setup because I know your story,
Yes.
A little bit of it. I don't know all of it, but this is definitely one of those inspirational stories. And what I want to do is, first of all, let me start by saying, how have you been?
I'm great. I'm a blessed man. I have a great, amazing life, and God has just done a wonderful work in redeeming my time. And so I just have a wonderful, wonderful life, great wife, great home, and a little puppy.
A little, a little puppy. Look, I got a cat.
Yeah.
Like me, most men don't like cats. I wasn't a cat fan either, but my wife loved cats. So sometimes
So you
gotta
love
do
cats?
it. Yeah, you gotta love cats, you know. But then my daughters love dogs. So can you imagine? I had like a little zoo at one time with cats and dogs, and it was just driving me crazy. But I don't really do pets. But it's awesome that you talked about how your life is amazing because now I want to get to the meat and the potatoes. Your life wasn't always.
That's right.
Amazing. Yes. As a matter of fact, for 31 years,
yes,
you were locked up in prison.
I was locked up on prison. Corey, I spent 11 years on death row for first-degree murder, for a murder that happened in 1986. And in 1986, I was charged with first-degree murder, sentenced to death row, spent 11 years on death row. Got all the way down to 6 hours and 6 minutes before I got a stay of execution. I had ordered my last meal. I didn't eat it, of course, but I ordered my last meal, made all my phone calls, said goodbye to people, and just really was ready to go, to be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord. So I was ready to go. And when I got a stay of execution, my sentence was overturned to life without possibility of parole. Well, that's a second death sentence in Oklahoma,
right?
Because you're going to die in prison. So, but I always knew that eventually, somehow, some way, that the truth would eventually come out. And I couldn't look to the justice system because they'd already failed me once. I couldn't look to family. I couldn't look to lawyers. I couldn't look to anybody. And so I'd look to Christ, the person who is truth. And my testimony was, I just really started doing everything I could in the prison system to mentor men, to help men grow as men. I started a mentoring program, a reintegration program. Here I started a reintegration program and was never reintegrated myself. Had a life without sentence, and there was no way I was reintegrating. So it's just amazing how God used me. I ended up getting my master's degree there in prison, and just really was favored all through the prison system, had the best jobs, and but still I had a sentence over that said life without the possibility of parole.
Now, and that's what I want to get to because I know the viewers are like, okay, you just said you were in prison for 31 years. 11 of those years you were on death row. Then you had a stay of execution. And then after that, when they didn't execute you, then they said life without the possibility of parole. But yet you're sitting right here, right now.
How'd that happen?
So that's where I want to get to. What happened? Now, I know there's a spiritual implication to this, but I want you to tell us kind of what happened in that natural way in the wheels turning in the justice system.
Well, the justice system is, of course, the wheels turn slow in the justice system.
Correct.
If they turn at all sometimes. And I didn't have DNA when I was arrested, so all I had was a presumptuous test, and a man was killed. They said I killed the man, and there was 4 other people involved, and they all pointed the finger at me, and they got down first, and so I was left holding the bag, so to speak. And another guy beat his case on what is called the 120-day Fast and Speedy Trial Act. And he got off. So here I am left holding the bag, and they, they're all saying that I did it. So as time went on, I started hearing about DNA, O.J. Simpson, and all of this stuff, and so I said, well, maybe this DNA thing can work for me. Well, first you have to have evidence, and for like 15 years they said they didn't have my evidence, and they'd lost it.
Wait a minute. I want to take a minute because this is real weird that you're saying O.J. Simpson, because I just sat and watched the whole O.J. Simpson versus the People like in the last couple of days, binge watching on Netflix, of course. And DNA was not around when your stuff happened. And then you're right, that's the one thing that they talked about in the O.J. Simpson trial. So if it wasn't around and it didn't exist, then how does that factor into your situation then? Because you said you didn't have evidence for 15 years, so where did it come from?
Well, the amazing thing about my situation was I'd write the county court clerk and say, where's my evidence? Can I have it? I'd like to have it tested. And so I heard DNA, and that's how you had to do it. So I filed all the motions, and I asked the court clerk for my evidence, and they said, we don't have it, don't write us again. And I'd write again and say, well, you have to have it. Where's it at? So finally, a lawyer couldn't do anything for me. And so I finally had a friend that was a private investigator, and I said, can you go down to the courthouse and see if they can find my evidence? She said, oh, sure. So she went all the way around the courthouse. They gave her a tour of the evidence room and all of that stuff, and couldn't find it anywhere. And as she was going out to her car to the parking lot, she made a wrong turn, Corey. And that wrong turn, she opened the door, and as she opened the door, the hallway lights illuminated the basement floor. On the basement floor was a Brahms sack that said Nolte.
What?
They had meant to throw it away years ago, or they threw it away.
Wait, stop it. Stop right there. You telling me a private investigator goes to do something for you, she doesn't go to the place she was going to go, she goes in an alternate direction, and then there's a Brahms, like burger sack?
Like burger sack.
On the ground.
With the evidence in it.
With the evidence, and it had been there for how long?
Years. About 20 years by that time.
It's amazing that nobody just picked that up as a Brahms sack and throw it away. Okay, continue, because this is, like, I hadn't heard this part of the story. So I'm interested, like the viewers are going to be interested. So keep on, go for it.
So she, again, was taken around the courthouse by the court clerk and went to the evidence room and didn't have nothing. And I was on her way out, of course, she saw the evidence as she thought that was the door to the parking lot. And she went upstairs, seized the evidence, and we sent it to the lab in California, the foremost lab in California. And they said it wasn't my evidence. So in 2009, I was exonerated. And you would think I'd get out of prison by that time.
Wait a minute. So you take the evidence, you all send it to a lab.
I had to pay for it.
Right. And they said it's DNA, of course. Mm-hmm. And they saying it's not your DNA.
That's right.
It's somebody else's.
Yes.
But this is the evidence they used to convict you.
Yes.
Now, the reason why this is so interesting to me is because when we have heard, and I know this show is going to be a little controversial for people, but it's okay because it needs to be heard. But a lot of times when we hear about these things, we hear about them in the case of African Americans.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
But here it is. You're not African American, as everyone can see, but it happened to you. So when you were going through all of this and then you find and you know, okay, I didn't do this. What were those feelings like that? I mean, you're sitting in jail for all of these years, decades now, and you're like, I didn't do it. What was going through your mind?
Well, first of all, Corey, I never went out and publicly said I never did anything because I know everybody in prison was innocent. So you don't go around crying that you're innocent because, again, everybody in prison is innocent. But it was fortunate for me because I was able to pay for DNA. The majority of African Americans and minorities in prison and jails can't afford DNA, can't afford lawyers, can't afford.
Is it that expensive DNA test?
One little test cost me over $750 a test, a sample.
Wow.
And I had 8 of them.
Wow.
So I had to pay for the polygraph tests. I paid for 2 polygraph tests, both I passed. It was just, the minorities can't afford them.
Right.
I was fortunate because, I made a living in prison with doing leather work and stuff like that. So I was able to afford that stuff. But the majority of the people in prison sit and linger in prison for the rest of their lives just because they can't afford
to prove that they're innocent.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you did. And so you said, now you were saying something a few minutes ago, you said, but you got a stay of execution, 2009?
No, I was exonerated in 2009 by DNA.
Saying that you didn't commit the crime.
That's right.
But you didn't even get out in 2009.
I didn't get out in 2009, 2010, 2011. I didn't get out until 2015.
Why?
Because, as we said earlier, the justice system wheels turn sometimes slowly, sometimes not at all. We had 2 court orders telling the prosecutor to answer the petition. They wouldn't answer it. They dragged their feet. They were worried about paying me. They were worried about all of these different issues. A prosecutor does not like to admit they're wrong. Now, this prosecuting team, of course, didn't prosecute me. This was years and years ago, but they still protect the office. They don't want to admit that their office
made that mess up.
Made the mess up. And so, we have people nationally across the country who spends at least 5 years or 5.5 years is the national average. Time they're cleared from DNA, and not technicality, but time they're cleared from DNA until they get out. It's because nobody wants to admit they did wrong.
Wow.
But DNA says they did wrong.
Because it's not, you didn't do the crime.
That's right.
So when they found the Brahms bag, how did they figure that it's a Brahms bag? Like, is no paperwork attached to it? Was it paperwork attached to it?
It said Nolte right on the bag. That's all it said.
And how did they know that it was? Were there witnesses that said that we did that years ago? We put that in the brown paper. We put that in the Brahms bag. How did that work?
No, of course they didn't say they didn't. Of course they didn't say they threw it away. They wouldn't say that. Of course they didn't say that we lost it. It was down in the basement in the courthouse. They had literally meant to throw it away and forgot it was there. And so what do you do in that case? You can't go after the court. You can't go after the county clerk. You can't go after any of that. You just have to go on and say, hey, we found it. Now let's move on.
Wow.
And, I was fortunate that they found it. Most of the time, Corey, in most cases, after years, the case is thrown away, the evidence is thrown away, they have nothing. So what do you do in that case? You sit in prison and you die, or you linger and you spend the rest of your life in prison.
So you got a lucky break, but you don't call it luck. You call it something else, and I want you to go ahead and share with us what that is.
Well, I mean, we can call anything luck. We can call it just you're fortunate, but I believe that I had a divine appointment to get out of prison and spend the rest of my life talking about His grace and talking about how in a hopeless situation, how there's still hope. And so for me, it was talking about Christ. For me, my whole reason that I am out of prison is because of God. And
now I'm going to tell you something, because I want to challenge you on a couple of things, because I think this is very interesting. You always hear about guys who get locked up, and when they get locked up, they all find religion, so to speak. And here it is, you're saying not only did I find religion, or how you phrase it, Christ, but you're saying that He actually did the miraculous for you, because you were locked up for 31 years, and then evidence that had been sitting in there pretty much since you had been locked up is still sitting there in a Brahms bag, but they never threw it away. I mean, I think that's the most amazing and most miraculous story in the world, because what are the chances? You're talking about 1 in 3 billion that would have still been there. I mean, you look at all of the staff turnover, the janitors, the maintenance men, all these people, and it's in a Brahms bag. You would eventually just say, oh, this is trash, let's throw it away. But that didn't happen to you. So I won't go here, because while you were in, you not only just were working with rehabbing and are helping rehabilitate other men and mentoring them, you went in there and you didn't just sit around, but you went to college. I understand that. Where did you go to school? Like, I didn't even know that they let you go to, I thought it may be like a mail order deal. I didn't even think they let you go to college. So talk about that.
Well, in prison you have selected opportunities to go to school, get your GED and all of that stuff. And a lot of people don't take advantage of that. And I wanted to. And so I started with Rose State to try to get my associate degree, and then moved on to Calvary University to get my bachelor's and master's. And you know, I wanted to major in counseling, but I changed my major to theology at the end. But for me, it was just try to do anything that I could to better me. I needed to better me, whether I ever got out of prison or not. I didn't get saved or have a jailhouse conversion because I wanted to get out of prison. Corey, I was a mess. I was simply a mess, and I was a bad inmate. I was one of the only inmates that ever taken off death row and put in a special housing unit because I couldn't be around other inmates. So I was.
So when you say you couldn't be around other inmates because it would inflict, there'd be jealousy because.
No, I'd inflict harm on them, and I stabbed a guy in there and did everything I could to create havoc in prison.
Really?
And I was a very, very bad inmate. And so when I got locked away with just me in a cell by myself, and recognized that I didn't even like me, didn't even recognize who I'd become, I looked in the mirror one day, a little tin mirror, and it was actually for the first time ever in prison scared. I was never scared in prison. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. So I had as you call it, a jailhouse conversion, or whether it's a hospital bed conversion, a side of the road conversion, or a prison experience, it's a conversion. And we all have them at some point. And I had one, and it changed my entire direction, my entire life, and who I became later. The prison didn't define me, Christ did. And the reason why I can tell about Christ now and what he did for me, even outside of prison, is because what he did inside of prison. I wasn't rehabilitated. I was converted. I was saved because I was a mess. I went from stabbing people for them putting scissors back in my hand to be the barber of death row, and so I had all the best jobs because I had been so changed. Staff had to see me, my peers saw me, and I was different. And when you have an encounter with Christ, you're different.
Now, this is the thing that getting me, because there are so many people when they do go and get locked up, they talk about how bad it is. What is a little bit of your experience, without getting too graphic or in detail, is it really as bad as they say it is in prison?
As bad as they say it is.
It's not. I mean, you see documentaries, you see lockup, you see all of these things, you hear about rapes, you hear about all this stuff. But is the TV or film people, are they undervaluing, under explaining it, or are they over the top with explaining it when you see the stuff now on television and film and stuff?
Well, I believe I believe that they create a drama that gets ratings.
Right.
So the more they can sensationalize something, whether it's a rape, whether it's a murder in prison, it's about ratings. When you're in prison, it's about lives. It's about how you survive when a situation can turn like that. You can have a riot just like that. You can have a killing just like that. And so they're creating ratings. In prison, you have to create your own environment. You have to find a way to survive whatever prison throws at you, and they throw everything at you. It's the most negative environment you can think of. It's the most violent. You can't even put that on TV, the violence.
So they're trying to depict it in the way they can, which is a little sensationalized. But you're saying, really, from what I'm hearing you say, it's actually worse than what they can even put on TV.
Absolutely. How do you put, like I've seen somebody's head cut off right in front of me. How do you put that on TV? You can't put that on TV. There's things that I've seen that would never go on TV. There's things that happen to guys in there that would never go on TV, that dehumanize a man, that they would victimize and prey upon, not P-R-A-Y, but P-R-E-Y on a person. And everybody's a predator. If you're not a predator, then you're preyed upon. And so prison, in some cultures, is a badge of honor. And when you get out, you get more cred, you get more street cred, you come back and you earn more stripes. I mean, so for a lot of people, it's a rite of passage. For a lot of cultures, it's a rite of passage. So it's not a big deal for them until they get in there and the realities of prison and really the finalities of prison happen.
Now, you said this. You said you made a statement. You said you were never really scared until that moment you looked in that mirror. Mm-hmm. But from what I understand, because I've never gone to jail before, but they tell me that association inside actually helps to keep you safe. Is that a true statement?
Absolutely
like being
true.
Associated with, different gangs and stuff. And they said there are very few loners.
That's true.
Because loners, even if no matter how tough they are, they become the ones who become the prey because they don't want to connect or be. And they said to refuse those alliances can end in your death.
Absolutely.
That's crazy because what was the most amazing thing? Some years ago, somebody said, have you ever read Jim Baker's account of going into prison? And I said, no. They said, well, I have the book, read it. And I was like, wow, I don't want to read this book. I'm like, the man did wrong and blah, blah, blah. For what he did, which was the money and everything, in his book, I got the sentiments that even if I did that with money, I didn't deserve to be in the environment that I was in. He said, because if it wasn't, and this is his words out of his book, he said, one man came to him that was a big old guy and said, one day just mad. He said, why does God hate me? And he said, and Jim Baker's not a big guy. He's a little bitty guy. For those who don't know, look him up. But he said, I was terrified. He said, because it wasn't that God wasn't there, but you couldn't sense him being there because of all of the darkness that is immense and it just is there. And he said, but that guy wound up being someone who he felt like God had sent to save him and preserve his life. And then in his book, and the reason why I'm going there, he said, because there are things that I saw in prison that I would never talk about.
Never.
He said, never. He said, because there are people in there, regardless of what you think if you get out here running your mouth and you thinking they're in there and I'm out here and they can't reach me, he said, that is not true.
Not true at all.
He said, they are so connected to what's going on the outside world, more so than people in the outside world. So with that being said, I heard you were the bad dude, but like, how was survival for you, man? Like,
survival was easy for me because I started out earning my reputation. And I had a good fight game, but then they knew I could use a knife. And so for years and years, I earned my reputation fighting. I loved to fight. And I boxed in growing up in school and boxed, when I was a kid. But boxing and fighting are two different things. Right. So I learned how to fight in prison and liked it. But then I would use a knife. They found 12 knives in my cell one time, and they asked me, why would I have 12 knives? So you only got 2 hands.
So this is crazy, man, because, the whole controversial thing is going on with, the Terrence Crutcher situation and, the cops saying he's a bad dude. But here it is, like, I think you can attest to this if you knew him. He wasn't that bad dude like you're a bad dude. Well, you were a bad dude. And so how often...
He led in the choir.
Huh?
Yeah, he was in our choir. He sung for the Lord and just was lived out his faith before his peers.
And were you converted the time you saw him and knew when he was...
Yeah, I was actually one of his pastors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so... I knew him when I went to Joe Harp. I knew how he carried himself in prison. So, when I see that, what a waste of life. I mean, just an amazing waste of life.
And so now you spend your days now actually helping. And tell me a little bit about what your post-prison work is like now.
Well, I have a number of different things that I'm doing. I'm getting ready to get into a ministry that goes back into prison. We're going to start a bunch of transitional houses outside of prison where men can come and be transitioned back into society the right way. But we're going to start mentoring them while they're there. And so for a year, we're going to try to capture their attention and find out how we can help them get ready. Because a lot of guys come out, Corey, and they're not ready for it, and that's why they go back. So for most guys, when they get out, it's like jumping off a fast-moving train. You know, just, I mean, one hiccup after another, and then they find themselves back in the prison. Well, we're going to try to reduce that. We're going to try to do everything we can to mentor these men and women and make them productive members of society there first, before they come out and be productive members of society here.
I want to stop you real quick because I heard you say something, and it's not to be religious or anything, and I kept hearing you say this earlier. You said, I wasn't rehabilitated.
No.
I was converted.
Yes.
So are you trying to tell me the only hope is you saw very little rehabilitation? The thing that really has to happen, and people have to be converted. They have to be willing to change and not just rehabilitate. Because when you rehabilitate, to me, is like rebuilding. But rebuilding what? Are you rebuilding the old person, or are you converting them to something different, to a change in life? And that's what I hear your sentiments are. Well, Michael, this show, Up Close with Corey Taylor, is all about helping people to understand what it takes to be successful. And you yourself know what that's like and know how hard that is to be successful, given your background and your story. What would you say it takes for a person to be successful?
Well, you know, again, prison has programs. Some of the programs are good, but a program will never change a man's heart. It may change a little bit of behavior at first. It may change his way of thinking, but it will never change a man's heart. So a program can never really convert, rehabilitate, or whatever word you want to put on it. The only thing that ever will change that a man's heart is his encounter with Christ. And that he's the person that gives hope. He's the person who gives everything in your, he's the person who can change a man's life totally. So my answer to that, Corey, would be that you have to have an encounter with Christ. You can't have an encounter with a program. A program will not change a man. No matter how many programs that I got involved in, there's so many programs a man can get involved in prison, because the program's always changing. The first thing that cuts in prison is programs. And so what happens when those programs, and there are no programs? What happens when you're in McAllister on 24 hours a day lockup and you can't go to a program? You have to have an encounter with Christ.
Wow. Michael Nolte, man, thank you so much for joining us,
Thank you,
man.
Corey.
That was a powerful
Appreciate you.
story.
Thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed our time today. I would like to thank my guest, Michael Nolte, for joining us. Think about this. Change is inevitable, but your attitude towards that change is always optional. Until next time, keep looking forward.